So namaste. I am extremely happy to be here, and it's a beautiful campus. So for the first time, I am coming to this campus. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers, the State Department of Archaeology, and also Somaya University for inviting me here for this important event. Now, friends, I will begin with the proto-historic research in Maharashtra. And I'm sure that most of you are aware that Deccan College is pioneer institute in conducting research in this particular field. And the pioneer architect is, of course, Professor S.D. Sankalia, the founder of the Department of Archaeology at Deccan College in 1939. And before the research was initiated, in fact, at the site of Jorve and Nashik, in 1950s, of course, it so happened that S.S. Sali was the superintending archaeologist in the Archaeological Survey of India. He was, of course, working as a officer, in fact, in block office at Sangamner, and he had a lot of interest in archaeology. So one of the farmers from the village of Jorve brought some pottery to him, and he was very fascinated. In fact, the pottery was so important, and he realized that perhaps this is a very distinct pottery which is not reported so far from any part of Maharashtra. So he took this to Dr. Sankalia in Deccan College, and Professor Sankalia also was very excited to see this particular collection, and he realized that perhaps they have come across a very important phase in the history of Maharashtra. And of course, then he began the small scale research at the site of Jorve. And then, of course, at the site of Nashik, he carried out the excavations. And then he established, the characteristic features of the early farming communities called the Chalcolithic communities in Maharashtra. So that is how, the understanding was that, in Maharashtra, the early settled life began only around 6th century BCE. But at one stroke, this was taken back by almost 1100 years. Because of this particular important discovery. So, of course, the role of Deccan College is very well known because Deccan College has undertaken pioneer research at sites like Jorve and Nevasa. And Nevasa, for the first time, the Chalcolithic phase was properly identified in chronological position. It was found below the early historic levels. And the true characteristic features of the Chalcolithic phase were also identified at this particular site. And then, of course, a large-scale excavation was undertaken at the site of Inamgaon. And again, Professor Sankalia was the lead researcher at the site of Inamgaon. And at this particular site in the country, that most of the new concepts of new archaeology, they were introduced for the first time for the collection of data. And also, it is here that the scientific research in archaeology began. One of the important contributions of Sankalia is that he established the Department of Archaeology with basic laboratories. Perhaps this is the only department in the world. The Institute of Archaeology in London has the different laboratories, but they are in different sections. They are not part of the same department. But here, for the first time, he was a visionary and he established this particular department of international repute. And at this department, most of the scientific research was conducted, at the site of Inamgaon. So that was a very important phase. Because of this particular research, we have fairly good understanding about the lifestyle of the Chalcolithic people, or the first farmers of Maharashtra. We also have fairly good understanding about the socio-economic conditions. I will show you some of the evidence from this particular site. But you can see in this map, this during the Chalcolithic phase, the entire subcontinent was occupied. We have some early dates coming from the northwest part of the Indian subcontinent. Also, we are getting some early dates from the mid-Ganga basin in the in UP. And in this area, the early life goes back to almost early settled life goes back to 7,000 BCE. Then the next important region, of course, was the Mewar region of Rajasthan, where we discovered, again, the credit goes to Deccan College. We carried out excavations at Balatal and Giloon, and the date or the antiquity of the settled life in this area is going back to 4,500 BCE. And then, of course, in the rest of the country, including Maharashtra, South India, eastern part of India, the early settled life began around 3000 BC, at some places 2500 BC, and in Maharashtra around 2000 BCE. So the whole region was occupied, and this happened because of the conducive environmental condition that happened in fact in this part. Then I mentioned about the site of Nevasa, which was excavated by Professor Sankalia very meticulously. And here you can see the position of the Chalcolithic phase, the early farming communities at the base of the cultural sequence here. And it is here that this particular phase was properly dated by seaboarding dates and also on the basis of the stratigraphical position. But as I mentioned that, the real scientific research in fact began in fact, at the site of Inamgaon. You can see in fact on the other side of the bank, the photograph of the site of Inamgaon, which was excavated between 1968 and 80. And it is here that, I was a trainee. I just finished my MA and joined, the excavations at Inamgaon. And two people, in fact, who have trained me in this field. In this photograph, you can see Professor Davlikar, M.K. Davlikar, my guide. And he is the one, in fact, who brought me, in fact, in archaeology and trained me in the field archaeology. Next to him is perhaps the best excavators of the country, Jeddi Ansari. And Jeddi Ansari, in fact, he taught me the field archaeology in totality. And also Professor S.N. Rajguru, you can identify him. He is the one, in fact, who began in the country geoarchaeological research. Then Professor M.D. Kajle, who was the first to develop the archaeobotanical research in the country. And then, of course, we have some draftsmen here who were also equally good. But on this side, you can see on the left-hand corner, Professor G.L. Badam. And he's the one, in fact, who developed the paleobotanical, or paleontological research in the Deccan College. So these are the scientists who actually developed the scientific archaeology in the country. And in this photograph, perhaps I don't know whether you can recognize, but you can see me in this particular photograph here, and also excavating a structure here. So I was fortunate to get a real scientific training at this particular site. So the remains that have been excavated at site, we have fairly good idea about the structural activities of the people. They mostly constructed the rectangular structures, and at this particular site also, for the first time, the application of ethnoarchaeology was done on large scale. When we were excavating, I remember, in fact, we discovered this particular platform, circular mud platform inside the structure. And all of us were confused. In fact, I was a student, of course, but Professor Davlikar, Jeddi Ansari, they were confused because they could not identify the function of this particular structure. But a couple of days later, we were invited for a cup of tea in the village, and in the village we saw the exactly identical mud platform there, which was used as a support to a storage bin. So from that, maybe that was a clue for us, and from that, we started developing the ethnoarchaeology in the country. And also, the most of the structures that were excavated in the at the site, they were mud structures. Only the basal course of the structure was surviving, and we had no understanding about what kind of the superstructures the structures had. But we also came across more or less identical structures in the village, and on the basis of the ethnographic data, we were able to reconstruct the superstructure of the structural evidence that we excavated. Now, I mentioned about the reconstruction of the society at the site of Inamgaon. Now, this was the first attempt, in fact, at the site of Inamgaon to reconstruct the social organization. What we found that, in the previous picture, you have seen, a single room or double room structures, at the site. So this was the common evidence that we found at the site of Inamgaon. But in the center, you can see a very, very elaborate structure. This is a 5-room structure at the center. In the next, you can see, in fact, the structure, and by the side of the structure, a public granary also. And, the excavators were wondering, what could be this particular structure. So they developed 2 hypotheses. One is that perhaps this structure belonged to a very rich person. That was an obvious hypothesis. And the other hypothesis was perhaps this is the structure belonging to a very important person, maybe the chief of the community. These were the 2 hypotheses. And this hypothesis, of course, was supported by scientific evidence, archaeological evidence. Because at most of the structures, we found these type of burials. These 2 urn burials, what we call as twin urn burials. Usually, the children were buried, even adults were buried within the settlement, either in the courtyard or below the living floor. And usually they were placed in 2 pots. The children were placed in 2 pots. But we found one unique evidence, in fact, one unique burial in that big structure, which was completely different. So they had not followed the usual custom for this particular burial. So that was unique burial found in that big structure. So this was a unique, very different evidence that we had. Secondly, most of the adults also were buried in a supine position in north-south direction. And usually the feet of the people were cut off before they were buried. Now, we do not know exactly what is the reason behind that, but probably, this particular practice is happening even in some parts of Goa. And particularly the pregnant women, when they die, their feet is cut off because the general belief that they should not turn into ghost and come back. So probably that was the belief during the Chalcolithic phase. So this was this is the kind of evidence that we found in most of the structures at the site of Inamgaon. But in that big structure, we found 2 unique burials. One which I showed about the burial of a child, and the other evidence is the burial of a adult person in that. So this person was also given a different treatment, not the usual treatment as was given for the common people. So he was made to sit in this clay jar. His feet were intact. So that indicates that perhaps this burial belongs to a person whose status was quite high in the society, and probably the normal rules of the community were not applicable to this particular person, and therefore this particular structure was identified as that belonging to the chief of the community at the site of Inamgaon. So this was the first exercise, in fact, done in the country, and by applying these new methods, by undertaking various scientific methods, this particular research was carried out. So very, very important research was initiated. And to substantiate, the presence of the chief, they also found some public structures. Trace of the fortification was also found. Along with that, there's a big embankment also was excavated or discovered, and this is also a supporting evidence for the presence of a chief. Usually, the chief plays very important role during the crisis. The granary was located by the side of by the structure of the chief, because he can take the control of the maybe granary and play important role during the crisis. Similarly, the water storage also was made in fact at Inamgaon, and it is here that the chief can play important role in the distribution of water and maybe during the crisis, that he can play important role. Also, in the upper part of the Chalcolithic level, the usual dating, in fact, that we have from the site of Inamgaon is between 1600 to 700 BCE. And after 1000 BC, we do find some kind of decline in the Chalcolithic phase. And the people, in fact, who lived, in fact, after the decline, they mostly prefer, these type of circular structures. So this is a kind of evidence that we find in the upper stage. And you can see some of the, flimsy structures which were built by the, what we call as the late Jorwe people. But we prefer to call that as the Chalcolithic right from beginning to the end of this particular phase. Also, you can see, that not all the people, of course, have constructed, circular structures. There were some people, in fact, maybe the rulers or people who were maintaining the settlement. They lived in a permanent structures like rectangular structures. But what is interesting that most of the rectangular structures that we excavated in the upper part of the settlement at Inamgaon, they were all burned down. And it is quite possible that they were burned down intentionally, and there is a substantial evidence for that. Also, you can see that in the evidence that we have from the burials in the lower level is very important, because we find proper treatment given to each individual in the early phase. But in the later phase, you can see that maybe a number of individuals have died simultaneously, and they have been buried hurriedly in a one pit. So sometimes in one pit we find couple of burials, multiple burials in some types. So this is a important evidence that we found, and it is possible. It is quite likely that the iron using megalithic people started moving towards this area, very close to Inamgaon. And these type of megalithic burials were excavated, were discovered, and they are typical, were similar to the burials found, megalithic burials found in the Vidarbha region. And they are dated between 1200 to 800 BCE. And one of the burials that was excavated, that burial in fact produced the even Jorwe pottery, indicating maybe close contact between the megalithic and the Chalcolithic people. And probably these people may have been responsible ultimately for the for the destruction of the Chalcolithic phase. Inamgaon also was a first site in the country where we carried out the aerial photography with the help of the toy plane. You can see that. So this was a maybe experiment that we made, in fact, here. And also the flotation technique was introduced at this particular site, because of which a lot of botanical remains were extracted from the site, and they were studied, and we have been able to reconstruct the entire history of agriculture in the Deccan region. And these are some of the material culture that is discovered from the site. We have a lot of the stone beads. We have a lot of the use of copper. Copper was used for a variety of reasons. Maybe they made some tools. They also made some ornaments. Also, we have the evidence of the manufacturing of copper objects here in the form of crucibles and the instruments that were used. These people also had contact with the coastal part, particularly with Gujarat region, because we find the bangles made of chang shell or the conch shell, and this conch shell is found only along the Saurashtra coast near Dwarka. Also, we have some evidence about to talk about the religious beliefs of the Chalcolithic people. They did not really follow these religious activities on large scale. These type of small figurines were probably worshipped, because we found one unique evidence in which there is a clay box in which there is a human figure inside, and outside on top of that was a headless clay human figure. So probably, and this was buried properly in a small pit. So probably this indicates a proper evidence of the maybe religious beliefs that time. This is some more evidence about the terracotta art. We also found a lot of terracotta bull figurines, and very close to the site, we did come across a shrine This particular shrine is worshipped by the Bhils. They come from all part of Western India, and they offer wooden bulls here. So probably that offering bull was the very old tradition started by the Chalcolithic people. Then we also found there this type of material that we have. These are the incense burner and also the lamps. Some objects made of stone, utility objects mostly. We also found some beads made of gold also. So this is the kind of evidence that we have. This is the kind of pottery that we find. We do have painted pottery, and on the basis of painted pottery, we could identify different phases in the Chalcolithic phase. This is the pottery which is from the lowermost levels at Inamgaon, and this resembles the pottery from in central India, which is connected or associated with the Malwa phase. So probably it is believed that Malwa people started moving in this region around 1600 1700 BCE. So this is the kind of pottery that we find. The pottery has tremendous impact of the Harappan people. This exactly the painting that we find, some of the shapes that we find, they resemble the Harappan shapes and Harappan paintings. And we do believe that that Harappans and the Chalcolithic people had very close contact. Just hurriedly, I'll show you the type of pottery that is found in this region, in the region of Maharashtra. These are the different pots that we found. There are some maybe legends also on the pottery painted. On this particular pottery, you can see, I don't know whether you can see, but there is a bullock cart with bulls yoked to it is engraved on this pottery. These are some of the storage jars that we find. These are the clay storage jars. This is the pottery from the uppermost levels. There is a decline in the phase, and that decline is reflected in the material colors also. Particularly the pottery becomes coarse and less painted in the upper part. They also have introduced some new pottery in this region. New shapes also were introduced by the Chalcolithic people in this region. And this pottery is important because this pottery indicates the contact between the Chalcolithic and the megalithic people, because the black and red pottery was mostly used by the megalithic people, and towards the end of the Chalcolithic phase at Inamgaon, this was adopted by the Chalcolithic people after the contact. We also have the evidence of the firing of the pottery in this region at Inamgaon. We also have some evidence, in fact, at the site of Daimabad, which is another important site, which was excavated by the Archaeological Survey of India. Dr. S. Sali was the excavator, and he found some of the very huge catch of bronze figurines, and these figurines are probably believed to have come from the Harappan region, indicating contact. Then in the third, after Inamgaon, in fact, we did what is known as the small site archaeology, under which two sites were excavated. One, of course, the site of Valki. You can see the nature of the site, very flimsy. The site was occupied, temporarily, maybe during the particular season. And at this particular site, we have found circular structures in clusters. So these are some of the remains that we have found in the excavation. And close to the site, we also came across similar clusters, which were built by the workers coming from southern part of India, and they also built the same kind of structure. So Inamgaon, the Valki was identified as the farm state of Inamgaon. So probably people from Inamgaon came here, maybe group of people came here, and they stayed here for some time, and they carried out maybe agriculture activities, and after that they went back. So this is the evidence, which indicates the presence here. We also have a lot of evidence about the ethnographic data, and that data was used for the reconstruction of the structural activities at Valki also. Some people stayed here permanently because we have found a couple of rectangular structures, and perhaps these people stayed here for the upkeep of the farm state at Valki. Also maybe few burials, exactly same as the burials found at Inamgaon. Even the fireplaces are not burnt, indicating that they were not really used for long period. We also have the evidence of this. This is the first evidence of its kind in the Chalcolithic phase, the seed drill, and you can see that that tradition continues even today. This is the, this is a plowshare made of bone found at Valki, and today's plowshares are exactly same, except that the modern plowshares are made of metal, whereas the ancient ones are made of bone and antler. The next site that we excavated was Kaute, which is in Dhule district of Maharashtra. And here also we found more or less same evidence as that Valki. The only difference that these structures are underground. In fact, they are sunken dwellings. They are also in the form of this in the form of clusters, and each function of each circular structure or circular feature here is different. But some of them were used for living purpose, some for storage, and maybe one or two for as a kitchen. We also have similar evidence of pottery making at the site here. Then we did find a lot of bone tools at the site here. We have not found much evidence of the copper or the other metal used here. Then also we did some regional survey, and the Tapi region was the one which was extensively surveyed, and for the first time we have done the site catchment, site settlement pattern studies that we began, and this is one of the regions, few regions in fact in the country, where this type of research was carried out. Just give the glimpses of that. So how the Rakhigarhi model can be used here? In fact, this is the main question that I want to address here. But what we did in fact at Rakhigarhi, which also can be done here, is that we did a lot of outreach program, because when we went to Rakhigarhi for excavation, the local people say that we will not allow you to excavate the site because we have a bad experience. The Archaeological Survey of India had excavated the site before us for 3 seasons, and they say that we have bad experience because you people come here, you excavate, you go back, and you people only get publicity, whereas this village does not get anything. So then we started outreach program. In fact, we started telling that we have come from Pune, and one of the reasons that we have come here is that we know that this particular village has a very very important history, and this village has contributed immensely to the history of South Asia and to the history of the world. So we say that don't you want people to know about that, and that is how slowly they develop interest in this. And then of course I will tell how ultimately they participated in the activities that we were undertaking there. Then we also introduced some new methods of excavation of burials. I think that needs to be done now all over the country. And we will suggest, in fact, Tejas Garge is here. They can undertake maybe maybe fresh excavation at sites like Inamgaon again, and generate some maybe targeted data for undertaking maybe archaeogenetic research here. And here, while excavating the burials, maybe we can take proper precaution. I'll show you, what precaution we need to take. Then we also need to, develop collaboration with different institutions. The research at at Rakhigarhi was done in collaboration with CCMB, where I am presently working, and also with University, Harvard Medical School, and also Seoul National University. And because of their collaboration, we were able to generate such an important archaeological research at the site of Rakhigarhi. As I mentioned, that archaeogenetic research is very important. You have to really understand the genetic evidence and the archaeological evidence to understand the origin and growth of the community. Also, how people look like. For the first time, we have done this craniofacial reconstruction, and there is a lot of scope, in fact, to do this in this part also. Also, by employing new methods like to understand the diet and health, a lot of new research can be initiated here. The site needs to be developed from tourism point of view. That is what we are doing, in fact, at the site of Rakhigarhi also. Then also, under the tourism development, we are conserving part of the excavated remains at the site of Rakhigarhi. We are also developing, the government of course is developing the site museum. I am developing, in fact, the Harappan Knowledge Center for the first time. We are going to show, how the knowledge that was developed by the Harappans, how it is relevant and useful even today. So that type of research, that type of exercise needs to be done. and there is a lot of scope for this type of development in Maharashtra also. And by doing so, by developing the site from tourism point of view, of course, you can generate a lot of local employment. There will be a lot of economic development happening. Also, we need to spread awareness about the cultural importance of the cultural heritage, and also they can serve as important knowledge centers. Then also, the type of scientific research that we did, in fact, at the site of at the site of Rakhigarhi, that same kind of research can be developed, in fact, in parts of Maharashtra on the Chalcolithic sites. So this type of different research can be done. Then we need to use, of course, latest geophysical instruments for the recording of the sites, and also for understanding the general understanding about the nature of the evidence, in fact, underground. So for which you can undertake maybe electric resistivity survey, and also GPR survey, ground penetration radar survey. And by undertaking this, we were able to understand different activity areas in different phases at Rakhigarhi, and that has helped us a lot. In fact, because of that, we did not have to excavate the site on large scale. So this is a very important tool that can be employed in this part. The type of precaution that needs to be taken, you have to take this type of precaution. We must make sure that there is no contamination happening, because DNA is so sensitive. The modern DNA can get into ancient DNA easily. By doing this, we have used this particular method, and because of that, we succeeded in getting DNA from this particular lady, 35 years old lady, and this was published, of course, in very prestigious journal. And as I mentioned that this research was also recognized by the International Conference on Genomics as one of the 9 breakthrough researches in the world. And this was that means this is accepted by the scientific communities all over the world. We also did this type of scanning of the data that we have found from the burials, and this data was used, in fact, for reconstructing the facial feature of the Harappans for the first time. And we have shown, in fact, how the Harappan male and female looked like exactly. And there is so much similarity between the Harappans and the modern people, that was also shown here. Also, we did a lot of outreach program, and now, in fact, people have realized the importance, and they are certainly feeling that that because of this research, this village is going to be benefited immensely, and they're already getting the harvest of that. And we feel that unless there is a participation of the people in the protection and preservation of the site, perhaps we will not be able to succeed in protecting the ancient site. And this is a model of the knowledge center, Harappan Knowledge Center, that we are planning to develop at the site of Rakhigarhi. We are in the advanced stage. So this is the kind of research that we have done at Rakhigarhi, and how this new approach can really help us in developing new research methodologies in Maharashtra, and also how we can develop the sites from tourism point of view. Thank you very much.